Whispered through marble corridors and buried beneath royal tombs lie the stories they swore would never be told. Not battles, not treaties, but the desires that ruled empires. Behind every jeweled crown was a locked chamber, and inside it, passion, betrayal, and bloodlines twisted by lust. Kings who killed to keep their secrets. Queens who took lovers forbidden by gods and law alike. Dynasties that rose on silk sheets and fell in scandalous flames. They rewrote their histories to hide the truth, but history remembers. Tonight, we uncover the forbidden affairs that shaped kingdoms, toppled thrones, and redefined power itself. Because sometimes it wasn't war that destroyed empires, it was love. If you crave the kind of history they tried to erase, the kind whispered about but never taught, subscribe and step into the shadows of the crown. In ancient Egypt, the gods did not bleed as mortals did. They ruled in perfect circles, husband and wife, brother and sister, flesh-bound to keep divine blood unbroken. The pharaohs believed themselves descended from these sacred unions, and so the cycle continued. Royal heirs born from royal blood, no matter the cost. For generations, the Ptolemies clung to that belief like scripture. Foreign rulers in a sacred land, they feared impurity more than sin. To share one's bed with a sibling was not scandal. It was duty. It was how a mortal could imitate eternity. By the time Cleopatra was born, that tradition had become a prison gilded in gold. She was taught that her family's strength came from their blood, not their mercy. Her tutors whispered of Isis and Osiris, divine lovers who had been brother and sister before the world was made. Cleopatra listened, understanding too well what her destiny meant. The palace in Alexandria shimmered with luxury, yet reeked of distrust. Every brother was a rival, every sister a threat. Marriage wasn't an act of affection. It was a declaration of war disguised as love. When her father, Ptolemy the Palthynth, died, the throne demanded a pair, a king and queen, joined not by desire but by decree. Cleopatra was forced to rule beside her younger brother, Ptolemy the Palthynth, a boy who had been raised to believe that the throne belonged to him alone. In the portraits painted later, they look serene, two divine children of Ra, crowned with serpents and gold. But within the palace walls, whispers thickened like incense. The servants knew what the statues would never say. Their marriage was cold. Cleopatra, sharp-tongued and fiercely intelligent, refused to play the silent goddess. Her brother, surrounded by scheming courtiers, came to see her as a threat. Egypt's throne became a battlefield hidden behind silks. Gifts turned to insults. Smiles turned to poison. She began to fear her own reflection, not from vanity, but because every glimpse reminded her of the divine lie she was forced to live. And yet, to the priests and nobles, this was holy order. A brother and sister bound to preserve the blood of gods. No one dared question it, until the day the kingdom itself began to fracture. The myth of sacred love had kept the dynasty alive for centuries. But for Cleopatra, it would soon become the spark that ignited the end of it. By the time Cleopatra turned 18, the illusion of harmony between her and Ptolemy the Themed had already cracked. The royal facade, the shared throne, the smiling statues, hid a slow-burning war between two children of the same blood, raised to destroy one another. Cleopatra ruled with precision. She spoke 9 languages, debated with priests, and rode into court like a monarch carved from marble. But her brother, guardians, ruthless men who treated the boy king as their puppet, saw her intellect as rebellion. They whispered that a woman's voice had no place in command. They poisoned his mind with fears that his sister meant to steal his crown. He believed them. What began as subtle slights, missing titles in decrees, stolen treasures, withheld tributes, soon hardened into open hostility. Cleopatra's name vanished from official records. Her likeness was scraped from temple walls. The boy she had once held as family now signed her death in ink and seal. The royal court, once perfumed with lotus and myrrh, turned bitter with suspicion. Guards shifted loyalties like sand in the Nile. Letters vanished. Spies bloomed like weeds in every chamber. Cleopatra began to sleep with a dagger hidden beneath her silks, its blade small enough to be mistaken for jewelry. Still, she refused to flee. Power was a language she had mastered better than any general. Instead of pleading, she performed. At banquets, she smiled beside her brother, her eyes unreadable, her laughter too soft to betray the rage beneath. The courtiers saw a goddess. They never saw the woman plotting survival. Beyond the palace gates, the streets of Alexandria stirred. The people adored her, the queen who spoke to them in their own tongue, who walked among scholars and merchants alike. Her charisma frightened Ptolemy's advisors, for they understood what he did not. Egypt's throne rested not just on gold, but on love. And Cleopatra had both. In secret, she gathered allies, generals loyal to her father, priests who despised the boy king's foreign tutors. She offered them not gold, but a vision of Egypt reborn. Yet before her plans could ripen, the council struck first. One night, torches flared through the palace courtyard. Soldiers stormed her chambers. Her banners were torn down. Cleopatra, wrapped in darkness and silk, escaped into the desert, leaving behind the marble cage that had once been her kingdom. She was no longer a queen. But she was alive, and for a Ptolemy that meant the war had only begun. The desert did not forgive, yet it sheltered her. Cleopatra crossed its burning spine with only a handful of loyal guards, her royal silks traded for coarse linen, her jewels buried beneath the sand. Behind her, Alexandria shimmered like a mirage, the city she had ruled now deaf to her name. She watched its lighthouse flicker in the distance, promising a home that no longer welcomed her. From the barren frontier, she began again. Messengers rode in secret, carrying her seals through wind and dust. Coins stamped with her face reappeared in border towns. The merchants whispered that the true queen still lived, that the Nile itself would not recognize the boy who sat upon her throne. Inside Alexandria, Ptolemy's court drowned in its own arrogance. His regents ruled through greed. They plundered the treasury, silenced priests, and taxed the poor until riots bled through the markets. The city that once sang hymns to its pharaoh now muttered curses. Statues were defaced. Soldiers deserted. The gods seemed to turn their faces away. Cleopatra saw her opening. She moved like a shadow through Egypt's borders, gathering what power she could. Desert tribes, mercenary bands, and former officials swore allegiance, not out of loyalty, but from hunger for stability. By the time her brother realized the threat, her banners were already rising along the Nile. Then came the storm neither could control. The arrival of Rome. Julius Caesar, conqueror of Gaul, had entered Alexandria in pursuit of his rival Pompey. But when he arrived, he found not victory, only the head of Pompey, severed as a gift from Ptolemy's council. The gesture, meant to please Rome, sickened Caesar. He saw treachery, cowardice, and opportunity all at once. Cleopatra understood faster than anyone that this foreign general could decide her fate. And so, in one of history's most daring gambits, she had herself smuggled back into her own palace, not in armor, but rolled inside a rug. When the carpet unfurled before Caesar's feet, she rose from the folds like a ghost of the old gods, defiant, graceful, unbroken. The Romans saw in her what Egypt had nearly destroyed, a mind sharper than any blade, a ruler born not merely to survive, but to command. Within days, the palace corridors that once echoed with her brother's voice now trembled under Caesar's soldiers. The war that had begun with whispers ended in fire. Ptolemy's armies fell along the riverbanks, their bodies swallowed by the floodwaters. Cleopatra stood on the balcony of her reclaimed palace and watched smoke coil above the harbor, her victory bought with ruin. The gods of Egypt had demanded purity of blood. Cleopatra had given them something far rarer, the will to endure it. When the fires of Alexandria dimmed, the Nile carried more than ashes. It bore the remnants of an ancient order. The palace that once divided brother from sister now stood hollow, its marble corridors echoing with the silence of the dead. Ptolemy the Theban had vanished beneath the flood, swallowed by the river his ancestors had worshipped. His crown, dredged from the mud, glimmered for a moment before tarnishing in the air. Cleopatra ruled again, but her throne was not the one she had inherited. The fiction of divine blood had cracked beyond repair. The priests still performed their rituals, but their chants sounded thin against the roar of Roman trumpets. Caesar remained in Alexandria, a foreign shadow beside her, both ally and danger. He admired her cunning, her fluency, her ability to speak empire in his own tongue. Yet beneath the candlelight, admiration blurred into something older and far more perilous. To the Romans, she was both queen and enigma, a woman who turned power into seduction and seduction into policy. Stories of her presence spread faster than ships could sail. How she dined beneath ceilings painted with stars. How her perfume drifted like prophecy. How she made men believe in destiny even as she measured their usefulness. What had once been called sacred incest was now recast as sorcery, and the West named her temptress instead of goddess. But Cleopatra knew the cost of myth. She watched as marble statues of herself were carved for Rome's temples, each one more foreign than the last. They called her the Eastern Witch, the Serpent of the Nile. Yet she understood the truth that those statues could never show, that survival required transformation. The old gods of Egypt had demanded bloodlines, the new gods of Rome demanded spectacle. She gave both, and neither truly owned her. In her court, Caesar's child grew beneath tapestries, depicting the birth of the world. Outside, merchants whispered that Egypt no longer belonged to itself. The sacred dynasty that had ruled for centuries had become a performance, a woman and her Roman lover playing at divinity before an empire that believed in conquest, not creation. Still, Cleopatra remained unbroken. She had turned scandal into strategy, sin into sovereignty. The same tale that once doomed her family now secured her legend. History would remember her not as a queen of blood purity, but as the ruler who reshaped desire into power. When dawn rose over the Alexandrian harbor, the waters reflected a new kind of divinity, one forged not in the lineage of gods, but in the defiance of them. Elizabeth was a monarch, sculpted by absence. Born amid the ghosts of her mother's execution, she grew under the shadow of the tower, where every whisper carried both warning and promise. From the moment she ascended the throne, her image became her armor, the Virgin Queen, untouched, untouchable, a living symbol of England's endurance. Courtiers painted her in ruby and pearl, their brushes turning youth into legend. Public proclamations spoke of her chastity as if it were a weapon, a magical shield separating her from the treachery of men. Every portrait, every procession, every carefully orchestrated gesture reinforced the illusion. Elizabeth was not a woman. She was England incarnate. But behind the fanfares and courtly bows, the Queen was human. She walked through corridors echoing with intrigue, her eyes scanning for both threat and opportunity. Each ambassador's gaze, each whispered counsel became a measure of power, and Elizabeth learned early that desire could be manipulated as easily as armies. Political necessity dictated her celibacy, yet rumor thrived in the shadowed corners of her palace. Men and women alike whispered of private audiences where the Queen's laughter lingered too long, where hands brushed with intent, where loyalty blurred into longing. These whispers served her. The legend of purity became the lens through which every action was magnified. Elizabeth knew that every alliance, every potential marriage was not about love. It was a negotiation. A glance could raise nations. A smile could dissolve treaties. She wielded fascination as a sword, letting the world believe her heart was unreachable, while carefully measuring whose devotion could be converted into influence. England, still young and precarious, watched its queen like a candle flame in a storm. To marry or to love could topple her realm. To remain untouched maintained its stability. And yet, in private, her heart ached not for crowns, but for connection. For the rare kind of passion that could exist in tandem with the crown rather than beneath it. It was within this tension between myth and desire that Robert Dudley appeared, a man whose charm threatened the very legend she had crafted. Loyal, ambitious, and dangerously handsome, Dudley became more than a courtier. He became the shadow of temptation, the pulse of forbidden possibility at the center of England's courtly stage. In the pages of history, she would remain the Virgin Queen. But in the chambers of her palace, the lines between devotion, politics, and desire had already begun to blur. And England's greatest scandal was quietly taking shape. Robert Dudley entered Elizabeth's court like a storm contained within a gentleman's suit. Every gesture, every flicker of his gaze seemed calibrated to capture attention without revealing intent. Nobles whispered that he was handsome enough to tempt kings and clever enough to manipulate queens. But it was his loyalty, or the illusion of it, that drew Elizabeth closer. The court, a labyrinth of tapestries and candlelit galleries, became their arena. Behind gilded doors, the Queen's laughter echoed, a sound both alluring and dangerous. Dudley's presence at state events blurred the line between professional respect and personal fascination. Observers noticed fleeting touches, the lingering brush of hands, details subtle enough to escape scandal, yet potent enough to inflame curiosity. Then came Amy Robsart. Dudley's wife, confined to a country manor, had grown ill under mysterious circumstances. Rumors spread like wildfire. She had fallen down the stairs, they said. Some whispered of poison. Others murmured about negligence. Elizabeth's court buzzed with suspicion, but the Queen's face remained serene, unreadable, betraying nothing. The timing was too precise to ignore. England watched as the Virgin Queen maintained composure, while her court's most eligible nobleman became a figure of fascination and fear. Dudley's ambitions collided with his desires. Elizabeth's caution collided with her curiosity. Every glance they exchanged was a gamble. Every conversation, a subtle maneuver in a game with stakes higher than marriage, the stability of a kingdom. Foreign envoys noticed the tension immediately. Diplomats sent coded reports back to Spain and France, noting that England's queen was entranced by her courtier. Such rumors, if true, could compromise treaties, inspire rebellion, or invite assassination. Yet Elizabeth allowed the proximity to continue, a silent declaration that control was hers alone. Meanwhile, the death of Amy Robsart lingered like a shadow over Dudley. No evidence tied him directly to the tragedy, but whispers became weapons. Elizabeth's restraint was extraordinary. She did not flee, nor did she declare innocence. Instead, she wove the scandal into the fabric of her reign, acknowledging its danger while keeping its power for herself. In the gilded halls of Whitehall, the tension between them was palpable. Desire, duty, and danger converged in every secret meeting, every intercepted letter, every careful smile. Elizabeth was learning that love could be leveraged, that fascination could be a tool to consolidate power rather than a threat to it. By the end of these maneuvers, the court understood one immutable truth. In Elizabeth England, affection was never private, and ambition was never innocent. Scandal was inevitable, but it could be controlled, shaped, and weaponized, if one possessed the mind and courage to wield it. The corridors of Elizabeth's court were alive with murmurs, like wind rustling through hollow corridors of an abandoned castle. Every noble's footstep, every servant's glance, became a potential signal. Gossip, once harmless, had become a blade, slicing through reputations with surgical precision. The Queen? Anne's private inclinations were no longer secrets. They were instruments in a game that stretched beyond palace walls. Foreign ambassadors watched with hawk-like attention. Spain and France, each wary of England's fragile stability, intercepted the faintest flicker of intimacy between queen and courtier. Letters carried double meanings. Envoys misread smiles as schemes. Any hint of weakness could justify invasion or revolt. Elizabeth understood that what was personal could become perilous. That desire, when revealed, was a threat to sovereignty. Inside the palace, Dudley's presence became both a comfort and a lightning rod. Courtiers whispered that the Queen's favoritism could topple alliances and ignite jealousy among powerful families. Every banquet, every audience became a performance, a delicate choreography in which Elizabeth balanced affection, influence, and intimidation. No one dared misstep, yet every action was analyzed for hidden meanings, alliances, and betrayals. Meanwhile, the Queen herself walked a careful line, She knew that overt attachment could provoke war or rebellion, while cold distance could alienate allies. She had inherited the weight of the crown at a young age, learning quickly that perception often outweighed truth. Love, in Elizabeth's England, was never private. It was a weapon, a currency, and a risk. Even Dudley's enemies, who sought to exploit the scandal, had to tread lightly. Any miscalculation could backfire, exposing them to the Queen's wrath. And Elizabeth, in her sharp awareness, turned each rumor into leverage. She allowed the court to speculate, to fear, to whisper, all while keeping ultimate control. Every threat became an opportunity to assert dominance. Yet the human heart is rarely obedient. Elizabeth's private longing, the spark she could not extinguish, remained a fragile secret, threading through the palace like a hidden river. Her advisors may have interpreted it as calculation, her enemies as weakness. But it was both, a personal impulse harnessed into political mastery. By the time foreign powers fully grasped the danger, Elizabeth had already transformed potential ruin into advantage. The very whispers that could have toppled her reign instead reinforced her mystique. England's queen had turned desire into authority, intrigue into influence. And the line between love and power blurred, leaving everyone else guessing where one ended and the other began. Elizabeth's evenings were filled with silence heavier than the tapestries that lined Whitehall. Courtiers whispered outside her chamber, but inside, only candlelight and the faint rustle of silk accompanied her. She had mastered the art of solitude, of turning absence into authority, and mystery into protection. Love, she realized, could never be allowed to overshadow the throne. Robert Dudley remained near, a shadow and a temptation. Their conversations, measured and deliberate, often lingered on politics cloaked as personal banter. Yet Elizabeth never crossed the line that could imperil her rule. Desire simmered beneath the surface, private and potent, but it was harnessed, a force kept in check by duty, vigilance, and an unflinching understanding of power. The court's gaze never wavered. Every gesture was scrutinized, every smile dissected. She became a living emblem, the sovereign whose personal restraint amplified national stability. In choosing the crown over love, Elizabeth ensured that England would endure, even as hearts quietly ached. Her decision was not denial of affection, but elevation of responsibility, a testament to the ruthlessness that leadership demanded. Scandal, once dangerous, became her shield. Rumors of secret meetings, hidden letters, and courtly fascination enhanced her legend rather than diminished it. Foreign diplomats, desperate to interpret her intentions, misread every signal. Allies and enemies alike feared her unpredictability, but none could challenge her authority. Elizabeth had transformed vulnerability into strategy, intimacy into intrigue. And yet, there was cost. Nights in the palace were lonely, corridors echoing with what could have been. The weight of the crown pressed not just on her shoulders, but on her heart. History would not remember the quiet sacrifices, the careful manipulations, the solitary moments of longing. It would remember only the Virgin Queen, untouchable, untamed, and immortalized in myth. Her legacy was a paradox, a ruler who had harnessed desire without succumbing, who had tamed scandal without surrendering autonomy. Elizabeth had turned the personal into political art, shaping a monarchy that survived because she refused to be fully human in the ways others expected. When morning light spilled across the Thames, it illuminated a queen both feared and revered, her power absolute and her heart carefully veiled. England had a monarch whose legend was forged in restraint, ambition, and the artful use of forbidden longing. A sovereign whose story would endure long after whispers faded into history. The halls of Versailles gleamed with gold so bright it nearly blinded the senses. Yet beneath the gilding, the court moved like actors on an endless stage. Mirrors multiplied every gesture, every glance, every whispered word. In Louis XIV's France, appearances were law, and seduction was as strategic as any military maneuver. Nobles drifted through vast chambers in embroidered silk, their fans flicking secrets across polished marble. Courtiers observed one another with the same precision a general might survey a battlefield. A glance could elevate a family's fortunes. A misstep could exile them forever. Versailles was not merely a palace, it was theatre, and everyone was performing. Louis himself understood the power of spectacle. His presence, commanding yet graceful, made the palace pulse with expectation. Courtiers vied to be noticed, yet none could claim the monarch's attention without risking envy, ruin, or both. The king's court was an ecosystem of desire and ambition, where influence often traveled through whispers, not decrees. It was here that mistresses became instruments of politics. Madame de Montespan's charm was not only personal, it was tactical. Her ability to sway Louis shaped policy, redirected resources, and defined which families thrived or withered. The corridors themselves seemed complicit, amplifying intrigue. A servant overheard a private word, a tapestry concealed a secret meeting, and the gardens offered secluded pathways for forbidden encounters. Even the architecture dictated behavior. Every wing, every gallery was a calculated stage, designed so that the mundane act of walking could become a performance of power and attraction. Versailles was a kingdom where seduction replaced swords, where influence flowed along the curves of silk dresses, the tilt of a hat, or the subtlest flick of an eyelid. Yet beneath the spectacle, tension simmered. Ambition collided with desire, and alliances were as fragile as crystal chandeliers overhead. Every courtier understood that success was temporary. The next smile, the next secret revealed, could shift the balance of power. Pleasure and peril were inseparable here. To captivate the king was to risk being destroyed by him, or by rivals who envied your position. In this gilded theatre, even the smallest action carried immense consequence. A whispered compliment could alter a treaty. A fleeting touch could redraw social hierarchies. To survive at Versailles required mastery of both charm and caution, of intrigue and discretion. Every courtier was an actor, every lover a strategist, and every gesture a gamble that could either elevate a dynasty or obliterate it. The palace was alive with possibility and danger. For those who understood the rules, power could be seized not by conquest, but by the artful wielding of desire. Here, seduction was sovereignty, and intimacy was currency. Madame de Montespan moved through Versailles like a shadow woven from silk and fire. She was more than a lover. She was a strategist in heels, every smile, every tilt of her head a calculated maneuver. Louis XIV's heart was her battlefield, and she knew the rules. Charm could govern armies, seduction could rewrite laws, and influence could travel faster than a royal decree. Power at Versailles was never confined to the throne. It flowed through whispered confidences, secret alliances, and the delicate shaping of perception. Montespan understood this intimately. Each intimate encounter was layered with strategy. A nod here, a laugh there, a secret revealed only to the right ear. Through her, the king's favor could decide who prospered and who perished. Her rivals were equally skilled, weaving webs of intrigue that reached every corner of the palace. Courtiers competed not only for attention, but for survival. One misjudged glance could result in exile. One poorly timed joke could spark a scandal that rippled through France. And yet, the mistress who mastered both charm and calculation could reshape history without lifting a sword. Montespan's influence extended beyond the bedroom. Estates were granted, positions secured, alliances forged, all through her proximity to the monarch. The king's council learned quickly that the path to power was no longer purely meritocratic. Favor in intimate chambers dictated policy, and France itself became a stage where passion dictated governance. Even the arts bent to her sway. Composers wrote in her honor, poets immortalized her beauty, and painters captured her likeness with divine precision. Her presence altered culture itself, transforming Versailles into a living testament to the intersection of lust and politics. Every room she entered shimmered with significance, every gesture a subtle command. Yet with power came peril. Rumors of poisons, plots, and occult rituals surrounded her. Accusations of black masses circulated in hushed tones, an attempt to undermine her influence through fear and superstition. She had to navigate the palace like a chess master, anticipating every move, predicting every counterstrike, and maintaining an image of untouchable elegance. Her mastery of seduction as strategy transformed the monarchy. Montespan-Aules's rise illustrated a dangerous truth. Influence could be wielded in private just as effectively as in council halls. Desire became legislation, intimacy became authority, and those who underestimated the Queen's favorite discovered too late that love and politics were inseparable at Versailles. The palace itself seemed to conspire with her. Mirrors that multiplied presence, corridors that guided footsteps, gardens that concealed meetings, all extensions of her influence. In this gilded labyrinth, seduction was no sin. It was sovereignty, and every move carried the weight of empire. Decades after Montespan, Versailles hummed with a different energy. Madame de Pompadour moved through gilded salons with a grace that concealed relentless calculation. Unlike her predecessors, she wielded charm as a quiet weapon, subtle, refined, almost invisible, yet devastating in its effect. Where others commanded with passion, Pompadour conquered with intellect. Every conversation, every casual laugh, was a test of perception. Ministers and generals learned that her favor was currency, her insight a tool for reshaping policy. Pompadour's power did not rely on scandal or spectacle. It rested on persuasion, discretion, and timing. She had learned that influence gained subtly could outlast the fury of fleeting desire. Art, philosophy, and science became her instruments. Pompadour sponsored painters, sculptors, and writers, turning Versailles into a crucible of culture that enhanced her stature. Salons echoed with debates she carefully curated, where every compliment and critique reinforced her presence. In her hands, the court's intellect and vanity became levers of control. The king, Louis XIII, was captivated not merely by beauty, but by her wit and counsel. His attentions, public and private, strengthened her position, yet she remained ever aware of the fine line between intimacy and overexposure. Her influence was durable because it was intelligent, deliberate, and invisible to those who failed to read its nuances. Pompadour's rivals learned quickly that scandal alone could not displace her. The palace had changed. Seduction was no longer about overt allure or jealousy, but about shaping minds, dictating taste, and quietly steering the machinery of power. Every letter, every invitation, every gathering was a chess move. Every smile was a subtle assertion of authority. Even the king's policies bore her imprint. Military campaigns, court appointments, and colonial ventures were affected by her guidance, often disguised as casual suggestions. She transformed the perception of a mistress from ephemeral pleasure to strategic partner. While gossip persisted in the shadows, its impact paled compared to her deliberate, quiet hand behind every decision. Versailles itself seemed to bend to her will. Chandeliers glimmered above salons where plots were diffused before they surfaced. Gardens, meticulously designed, offered privacy without secrecy. Spaces where alliances were nurtured under the guise of leisure. Pompadour's genius lay in turning the ordinary into instruments of power, making every social interaction both theater and governance. Her legacy proved that seduction could be long-lasting, that influence could endure without scandal, and that the crown itself could be shaped through intelligence and artistry. In the annals of Versailles, she became a symbol of strategic intimacy, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful conquests occurred not on battlefields, but in whispered corridors of the heart and mind. By the late 18th century, Versailles had transformed from a palace into a crucible of ambition, where seduction shaped not just hearts, but entire dynasties. The mistresses who had once captivated kings were no longer fleeting ornaments. They had become architects of legacy, their influence etched into law, art, and history. Each alliance formed within the gilded halls rippled far beyond the gardens. Children of favor, political appointments, and strategic marriages carried the echoes of whispered power. The palace's corridors, lined with gold and mirrors, reflected more than opulence. They mirrored the intricate web of human desire harnessed into governance. Those who walked these halls learned that love and lust could be tools, capable of building or toppling nations. The lessons of Montespan and Pompadour endured. One wielded scandal like a weapon, leaving an indelible mark on France's military and cultural decisions. The other transformed charm into policy, guiding a king's hand with subtle intelligence. Together, Their legacies illustrated the dual nature of influence: bold spectacle and quiet mastery, both necessary to survive and thrive in a court where temptation and ambition were inseparable. Even beyond the palace gates, their reputations shaped Europe. Foreign monarchs and diplomats watched every interaction, calculated every smile, and feared the unseen forces that manipulated kings. Versailles' power extended into capitals, embassies, and battlefields, proving that personal desire could be as potent as armies in shaping history. Art preserved their memory, but history immortalized their strategy. Paintings, statues, and tapestries depicted beauty and elegance, yet beneath the surface lay calculated intelligence, maneuvering, and foresight. Their lives were proof that seduction, when harnessed with skill, could influence decisions, shape dynasties, and leave an enduring imprint on the political landscape. For the court, desire became synonymous with diplomacy. A whispered word, a fleeting touch, a carefully timed glance could alter succession, provoke rebellion, or secure treaties. The palace had become a living organism, with mistresses as its heart, pumping influence through the veins of power, ensuring survival and dominance in a realm where appearances were law. In the end, Versailles was more than stone and gilding. It was a testament to the subtle artistry of influence. The women who had walked its floors mastered the delicate balance between temptation and authority, leaving a legacy that extended far beyond personal romance. They proved that desire, when understood and wielded with intelligence, could shape history itself, leaving kings enthralled, nations in motion, and dynasties forever altered. Beneath the marble floors of St. Peter's, corridors twisted like veins, hiding rooms that no pilgrim or cardinal dared to mention aloud. The air was heavy with incense and secrecy, the scent masking whispers of indulgence that would shock even the most devout. Here, the Vatican's most sacred walls concealed acts that threatened both faith and power. The popes, cloaked in gold and red, were both shepherds and sinners. Some sought pleasure behind locked doors, their choices shielded by ritual, privilege, and fear. Servants who glimpsed these scenes often vanished, their absence attributed to illness or travel. Rumors persisted in shadowed corners. A cardinal's favorite chamber, a secret staircase leading to hidden alcoves, a golden key that opened the forbidden. In these chambers, devotion intertwined with desire. Candles flickered against frescoed ceilings, revealing paintings of saints that bore silent witness to acts both intimate and profane. Music, soft and haunting, accompanied rituals that blended worship with transgression. Every gesture was calculated, every whisper measured. The stakes were eternal salvation and mortal power. Even the Vatican's politics were suffused with scandal. Decisions of war, alliances, and papal succession could be influenced by a favored chambermaid, a young page, or a trusted confidant who bore knowledge of hidden indulgences. Influence flowed as easily from pleasure as from prayer, and no council meeting could rival the potency of a private encounter behind closed doors. One pope's reign became infamous not for theology, but for secrecy. Gold-encrusted keys unlocked doors to rooms where hierarchies dissolved beneath velvet and candlelight. Nobles, priests, and visiting dignitaries found themselves pawns in games played behind the sanctity of confessionals. Even the most righteous feared the reach of the chambers, the way desire could dictate decisions, manipulate patrons, and shape policy without leaving a trace in official records. Yet exposure was perilous. Rumors could ignite scandal, letters could be intercepted, and enemies could weaponize knowledge of indulgence. Popes balanced on a razor's edge, navigating morality and appetite, all while maintaining the illusion of divine purity. The line between devotion and corruption was perilously thin, and those who misstepped risked more than reputation. They risked legacy, power, and even life. The Vatican's shadows were alive, and within them, secrets flourished. Desire was not merely personal. It was political, strategic, and immortalized in whispers that would echo across centuries. Every hidden chamber, every locked door, every candlelit alcove contributed to a history that the faithful could not easily imagine. A history where power and lust were inseparable, and the sanctity of the Church could be both weapon and stage. Cardinals moved through the Vatican like predators cloaked in velvet, their devotion outwardly pious but privately calculated. Influence was currency, and intimacy was the most potent form. A whispered secret, a stolen glance, or a carefully courted favorite could elevate a minor prelate into the corridors of true power. Many cardinals maintained hidden lives, cultivating lovers whose loyalty could tip the balance of papal elections or sway decisions on crucial matters of state. These relationships were meticulously orchestrated: the right servant, the right chamber, the right moment. One misstep, one rumor, could unravel years of careful maneuvering, but those who succeeded gained authority that few could contest. Palace servants knew the risks. To be favored by a cardinal was both privilege and peril. Some vanished without trace. Others found themselves suddenly married off to obscure provinces, and a few paid with life for indiscretion. The Vatican became a maze where desire dictated strategy, where pleasure and peril were inseparable. At night, hidden passages echoed with muted footsteps. Lovers met behind tapestries that hid elaborate frescoes, their clandestine acts witnessed only by saints frozen in painted eternity. It was a theater of temptation and survival. Each encounter an assertion of influence, each favor a subtle assertion of hierarchy. Those who underestimated the stakes quickly discovered the deadly consequences of indulgence within sacred walls. Papal favor was mercurial. A cardinal's position could rise or fall depending on whom he courted, whose loyalty he secured, or which secret he protected. Battles of affection were as consequential as battles of faith. The corridors of the Vatican were lined with the echoes of ambition cloaked in seduction, where moral compromise was often necessary for survival. Rumors were the most dangerous weapons. One misattributed gesture, one intercepted note, could ignite scandal that reached the ears of monarchs abroad. Foreign emissaries knew that the Vatican's private intrigues were entwined with global politics. Marriages arranged, wars influenced, treaties renegotiated, all contingent upon the precarious alliances formed behind closed doors. Yet amidst the treachery, some cardinals mastered the art of subtlety. They turned desire into leverage, charm into strategy, and intimacy into authority. For them, the church was not only a spiritual bastion, but a stage where human weakness could be transformed into power. Every secret passage, every forbidden chamber, every whispered confession became an instrument in the orchestration of control. The Vatican's history, long sanctified in the light of divine guidance, was equally written in shadow. Behind its sacred walls, desire dictated decisions, passion shaped policy, and the line between sanctity and corruption blurred into a dangerous, intoxicating dance, one that could elevate the ambitious or destroy the unwary in a heartbeat. In the quietest corners of the Vatican, danger lingered like smoke. Not every scandal was whispered. Some were lethal. Poison, subtle and untraceable, became a tool in the shadows, used to eliminate rivals, silence witnesses, or control the ambitions of those who knew too much. A misplaced cup, a hidden vial, or a secret recipe could decide who lived to cast a vote for Pope, and who did not. Some chambers held more than clandestine lovers. They hosted rituals that skirted the edge of orthodoxy. Candles burned with blackened flames. Incense was infused with hallucinogenic herbs, and chants echoed in languages long forgotten. The participants believed they were invoking divine favor, but many were simply exploiting fear and superstition to consolidate power. Even the holiest of walls could not contain the human hunger for dominance. Young pages, drawn into these hidden ceremonies, often became pawns in games far beyond their understanding. Their obedience ensured access, their silence guaranteed survival. Yet every misstep risked ruin. Every ritual, every poisoned drink, every clandestine act served a dual purpose: pleasure and political leverage. Desire had become as lethal as any blade. Cardinals and papal favorites alike navigated this treacherous environment with precision. Each step was calculated, each word carefully measured. A smile could disguise deadly intent, a touch could signal allegiance, and every favor carried weight far beyond intimacy. The Vatican, though outwardly sacred, was a labyrinth where morality was negotiable, and ambition was the ultimate law. Even foreign dignitaries felt the ripples. Rumors of secret ceremonies and mysterious deaths reached Rome's gates, prompting whispers in Paris, Vienna, and Madrid. Monarchs understood that papal influence extended through both faith and fear, and that knowledge of forbidden acts could shift alliances or ignite conflict. Within the church, power was inseparable from secrecy, and temptation was inseparable from survival. Yet the popes themselves were not immune. Even a pontiff could fall victim to envy, lust, or miscalculation. Those who indulged without caution risked assassination, exile, or disgrace. In this arena, the line between sin and strategy blurred, and every indulgence carried consequences both immediate and eternal. By the end of each clandestine night, the Vatican retained its sacred appearance, its rituals hidden beneath layers of piety and gold. But beneath the sanctity, desire dictated decisions, rituals masked politics, and poison could secure dominion. Within these hidden chambers, the Church's history was written not only with devotion, but with audacity, danger, and the human hunger for power that no amount of sanctity could restrain. By the time history chronicled the Vatican, much had been sanitized. Official accounts spoke of devotion, theology, and divine guidance. Yet behind the polished narratives, a hidden legacy persisted, a story of human ambition, secret desires, and the perilous dance of influence that had shaped popes and politics alike. Every whispered scandal left an imprint. Cardinals who had courted forbidden lovers shaped decisions that echoed through decades. Papal favorites had subtly redirected alliances, brokered treaties, and even influenced succession, their influence invisible to the public eye, yet profound in its effect. The Church's history, written in sacred texts, carried a shadowed parallel, a narrative only accessible to those who could read between the gilded lines. The consequences of indulgence were enduring. Certain factions within the Vatican learned to wield secrecy as armor, creating networks of loyalty and fear that ensured their survival across generations. Knowledge became power, and discretion became an art form. Those who mastered both could navigate centuries of intrigue without falling prey to scandal, while the reckless vanished into obscurity or disgrace. Even architecture and ritual bore witness. Hidden staircases, sealed chambers, and coded ceremonial practices were reminders of how easily desire could intersect with authority. The very design of the Vatican, labyrinthine corridors, concealed passageways, and private sanctuaries, facilitated control through secrecy. In this sense, the palace itself became an instrument, ensuring that power and pleasure remained entwined. The legacy extended beyond Rome. Monarchs, diplomats, and rival churches observed these hidden networks with a mixture of awe and fear. Reports of secret alliances, dangerous liaisons, and concealed rituals reached far-off capitals, shaping international politics and influencing decisions of war, peace, and negotiation. Desire had become a geopolitical force, an invisible hand guiding events as surely as any army. Yet amid the shadows, there were lessons of survival. Those who endured understood that power required vigilance, strategy, and the careful management of temptation. The human heart, even within the walls of the most sacred institution, remained a battlefield where ambition and desire collided. History's enduring lesson was clear. Influence often lived in the unseen, and the greatest legacies were forged not in public ceremonies, but in private, where pleasure, risk, and calculation intertwined. By the time sunlight touched St. Peter's Dome, the Vatican appeared serene and unassailable. But the echoes of whispered scandals, secret chambers, and strategic liaisons continued to resonate, shaping the institution's culture and politics for generations. The Church, sanctified and solemn, had been indelibly marked by human desire, a reminder that even the most sacred halls are never immune to the shadows of ambition.